and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Our presenter today is Donna Birdwell, and she will be discussing Tibetan Buddhism and the Bardo state. Ms. Birdwell is a novelist and artist whose work is informed by her career in anthropology and her travels to many countries. Ms. Birdwell holds a PhD in anthropology from SMU, and she previously taught at Lamar University in Beaumont. She maintains an appointment as a professor emerita. She is also a long-term student of Buddhism. Let's give a round of applause in welcoming Ms. Birdwell.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see such a nice audience. I'm going to just say a couple of things first. I was involved with the Unitarian community in Beaumont, where I taught at Lamar, and we thought it was great if we got a congregation of 20 on a Sunday, so I love this place, and I'm really pleased to be here with you. I'm going to begin with a passage from my latest book, which is called Flight of the Owl. This was kind of a springboard for wanting to think about this whole topic a little bit more. Flight of the Owl is volume 3 of my speculative fiction series, The Recall Chronicles. Chapter 1, Departure. Friday, March 7th, 2127. I loaded my meager belongings into the back of the auto car and crept away under cover of darkness, not even switching on the lamps until I'd rounded the first bend in the broad arroyo that was the only road in and out of the community that had sheltered me for the past 7 months. There was nothing left for me in Lechuza. Fresh snow fell in big silent flakes that clung to the dry grasses and junipers. The only sounds were the slow crunch of tires through gravel and the occasional slap of Plastiflex blades sweeping wet snow from the windshield. I listened past those sounds, attuning to the silence of the snowfall. If I were making a flick, this is how it would open, with this scene of a man driving alone through the damp New Mexico dawn in a tiny solar-powered autocar, the only transportation available to us after civilization ended. No narration, no sound. Zoom out, fade in music. Something with cello and oboe and the slow heartbeat of hand drums. The car turns onto the paved roadway. Its beams fall on the rubble of roughly harvested crops. A recumbent cow startles, eyes glowing, head erect. It flicks an ear and resumes chewing. Pan to fields of towering Totex windmills silhouetted against the dawn, silent, motionless. Wipe through a sequence of abandoned shops and recharge stations. Doors and windows are smashed, walkways littered with debris, food wrappers, drink containers. Fade to a city. Add horns and timpani as the music rises. I'd need to show the cities, even though I'd be creating these scenes from my imagination, from my nightmares. I'd already left my city. It's called Denver, in the US state of Colorado, before the pandemic, months before the collapse. To tell the truth, I was already on the run from the corporate cops, but I'm not sure if that has anything to do with this flick. Cut. Just stop. Who am I kidding? Flicks are finished. There's no audience anymore, no cameramen, no actors, no musicians. No plot, only frayed ends, static chaos. Everything I thought I knew seems to matter hardly at all now, and I don't think I can storyboard my way out of this leaden sense of hopelessness that hangs in the air, choking out the last vestiges of life as I knew it. To tell the truth, I don't know if there's anything left out here at all. But here I am anyway, on my way back to where I was 7 months ago, back when the world still existed. Snow flurries evaporated into sunshine as I continued my journey westward, heading for my friend Dexter's town on High Mesa in Arizona. Before I did anything else, and I did have a plan of sorts, I needed to find out if she was still alive, to let her know I'd survived. And here I'm skipping ahead to chapter 2. Saturday, March 8, 2127. Dexter roused me before sunrise so we could offer our prayer sticks on the hillside. I watched and listened as she recited prayers in Hopi and offered bits of cornmeal along with the beautifully crafted sticks. I added a prayer of my own in Tibetan, and she didn't disapprove. All these early mornings reminded me of my years as a monk. I was a lot younger then. After the prayers and a substantial breakfast, we said goodbye to Dexter's family. As she released her grandmother from a lingering embrace and turned to go, her elbow struck the edge of a shelf, knocking a pottery vase to the floor. It didn't just break, it shattered. Dexter stared at the pile of shards at her feet, then looked up into her grandmother's eyes. They were both close to tears. I thought it must have been a valuable vase, or at least a cherished family heirloom. Dexter reached down for one of the shards, placed it in her handbag, and walked away without looking back. I put her travel bag into the back of the autocar, and as we set off, I said a prayer for mindfulness in the management of the vehicle, which I guess shouldn't really be called an autocar anymore. I'm sorry about the vase, I said as we passed the checkpoint on our descent from the mesa. Was it a family heirloom? No, Dexter replied. It's just that in ancient times, there was a custom when communities would set off to settle a new place. They'd break all the pottery before they left. This felt like a sign that I won't be coming back here. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes again, and I didn't know what to say. So, as usual, I said nothing. It was Dexter who finally broke the silence. It sounds like you didn't have a lot of time with your sister. No, I said. By the time I got there, she was already ill. I wanted so much to be helpful, but all I knew to do was say some prayers and read her some passage from a Tibetan book about the fearful, narrow passageway of the Bardo. I remember you telling me about the Bardo. That's the term for the in-between state, right? Between lives? I nodded. Sometimes we use Bardo to talk about other kinds of in-between times and places too, like right now. This space between what used to be and whatever's coming next. Major Bardo. I glanced at Dextra. I knew she understood. I think a lot of us have been feeling like this lately. This sense of being caught between something that's ended and an uncertain future. What exactly is a Bardo? Literally, the Tibetan word bar means in between, and do means suspended or thrown. So a bardo occurs when we are suspended in between or thrown into a gap. The Tibetans are certainly not the only ones who see something important in such in-between states. Anthropologists, I have to throw in some anthropology in general here. Anthropologists have found that transitional states are recognized and ritualized in many cultures all over the world, and we call such rituals rites of passage. The term rites of passage derives from a classic 1909 publication from French anthropologist Arnold van Gennep. Such rituals mark important life crisis situations such as birth, maturation, marriage, but also promotion, such as installation as chief or priest or maybe president. And of course, death. Van Gennep identified 3 phases in these rituals: separation, margin, and aggregation. First, there is the separation, which involves detaching the individual from their previous status, taking the child from the womb, removing the youth from their parents. Next, there is the margin, or limen, which means threshold in Latin. This is the in-between part, and we'll address this in more detail in a minute. But finally, there is an aggregation or incorporation into the new status. The infant is given a name that links them to family, culture, and community. The youth is given new clothing, ornaments, a new haircut, tattoos, a driver's license, or other marks of adulthood. The ordained priest is given a title and distinctive garments and paraphernalia. The apparent function of such rituals is to help us change our minds about ourselves or other people, to facilitate a change of status by dramatizing the event in an unmistakable way. British anthropologist Victor Turner focused attention squarely on the middle portion of this ritual, the marginal or liminal phase. He wrote, "Liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between the positions assigned and arrayed by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. Liminality is frequently likened to death, to being in the womb, to invisibility, to darkness, to bisexuality, to the wilderness, or to an eclipse of the sun or moon." Very dramatic stuff. The liminal period is often marked by a significant amount of training, education, or imparting of secret knowledge. Liminal individuals have no status, property, or insignia, no kinship associations. Their behavior is normally passive or humble, as though they are being fashioned anew and endowed with additional powers to enable them to cope with their new station in life. Among themselves, they tend to develop an intense comradeship or communitas. With regard to the idea of rites of passage that mark transition to a new status, may I make a few contemporary observations? Let's talk about how it applies to the transition of, say, a new president. We might observe that the separation stage pertains to the election process, during which an individual is singled out to be accorded this new status. In our particular tradition, this is a very protracted and contentious process. And in the present iteration of the process, there is a certain lack of agreement about the legitimacy, which has prevented our coming together to wholeheartedly anoint and ordain our new leader. Stage 2 is the liminal stage, the margin, the betwixt and between, which is where we are now. Our president-elect is supposed to go through a period of learning and training, which in our tradition includes intelligence briefings and consultations with wise elders of government. It also normally entails a solidification of that communitas with fellow members of the victorious party. Neither of these things seems to be going terribly well in the present situation. The designee for the new status is resisting the education and failing to bond satisfactorily with his community. He is also clinging ferociously to his previous status and property and kinship associations. All of the above, I would suggest, does not bode well for the third stage, the aggregation or incorporation into the new status, as traditionally defined by our culture, and this is due to occur in less than 2 weeks. It's hardly surprising that we feel an ominous sense of things going wrong. In addition to these rituals marking individual transition of status, there are also communal rituals of transition. We've recently gone through such a ritual with our New Year's celebrations. Such celebrations tend to identify certain times as powerful or dangerous times of transition or change, and are duly loaded with things we do for luck or to otherwise encourage positive outcomes. In the South, we have a tradition of eating black-eyed peas on New Year's Day. I did. I cooked a big pot of black-eyed peas for my kids, along with some type of greens signifying wealth. Now, in my family, we've substituted kale for the more traditional cabbage. So maybe our meal says something about our wish for good health as well as wealth. My sister also recently returned from Europe, where her travels in Austria and Germany, she found that the post-Christmas stalls were filled with all kinds of pigs, which turns out to be a symbol of good luck in those particular countries. So the things that we feel are going to bring us good luck are highly variable, but the date we designate for the celebration of our communal transition, concluding a past year and welcoming a new one, varies greatly. Agricultural peoples in the Northern Hemisphere have tended to fasten on a celebration somewhere near the winter solstice, when the day is shortest and the night longest. Symbolism tends to include green foliage, to encourage reemergence of life, and fire and other lights to encourage the sun to return again and brighten our days. The Celtic peoples developed their own understanding of the seasonal cycles, and their New Year was celebrated on November 1st. In Ireland, it is called Samhain. Its timing is described this way. After the last apples are picked, agricultural work ceases, and the year begins again with its dark winter half, in which the earth rests and fertility is renewed. During the festival, all household lights are extinguished and then relit from the ceremonial bonfire. I was actually in Ireland once on Samhain and happened to be driving from Dublin on the East Coast to my research site in County Kerry on the West Coast. And all across the country, across the landscape, there were bonfire after bonfire after bonfire. It was quite a spectacular sight. The Celts considered their New Year, and we'll see this again soon, to be a gap in time during which barriers between our ordinary world and the other world are removed. They included a custom of providing hospitality to one's dead ancestors who returned to visit the homes where they lived. The suspension of the laws of space and time extended also to the laws of society, and anything could happen on the night of Samhain. In a way, kind of like a little bit reminiscent of Mardi Gras. And by the way, it occurred to me as I was putting all of this together that our Christian traditions seem a little ambiguous as to whether the new year begins at Advent with the birth of Jesus or at Easter with the resurrection. You could probably take either one and be good. But clearly the timing of our respective transitions into a new year are cultural rather than natural phenomena. Examine the dates at which the new year is celebrated. The Celts, November 1st. The Gregorian solar new year comes on January 1st. The Chinese will welcome their Year of the Rooster, according to a lunar calendar, on Saturday, January 28th. It varies from year to year because it's on a lunar calendar. You have to consult somebody to find out when it's going to be. The Tibetan New Year, Losar, which also is determined by a lunar calendar, is set this year for February 27th and will be celebrated, by the way, as the Year of the Female Fire Bird. You can't have a female rooster. Of course, each culture counts the cycle of years differently as well, so it's not really 2017 in these other places. Some cultures devise cycles for the measurement of time that are even more complex. The Mayans. Are we getting that? Oh, it's back. The Mayans had a couple of different calendars. One was the Tzolk'in, with 20 months of 13 days each. Can we pull that one up? It's not happening. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And the other one was the Hop, made up of 18 months of 20 days each. Basically a lunar calendar and a solar calendar. But the solar calendar with 18 months of 20 days, can you do the quick math there? How many days do we get? 360, right? Not quite enough. So what they did is they added 5 days at the end called Wayeb that are basically time out of time, nameless, dangerous, but dramatically marking the transition to the new year. During Wayeb, portals between the mortal realm and the underworld dissolved. No boundaries prevented the ill-intending deities from causing disasters. And so, of course, they had customs and rituals to protect themselves. You didn't leave the house during Wayeb. You didn't wash your hair. You didn't even comb it. Not washing for 5 days, that's okay, but anyway, the point is that to some degree, what we do is arbitrary, but the fact that we feel compelled to do something indicates our intense need to find some point where we acknowledge the cyclical nature of time and declare a boundary separating past from future, to give ourselves a chance to renew and begin again. Now that we've put the notion of Bardo, and all of this is really very similar, in a broader cultural context, let's take a closer look at what Tibetan texts actually have to say about Bardo. Sogyal Rinpoche delineates a standard view of 4 Bardos. Number 1, the natural Bardo of this life. Number 2, the painful Bardo of dying. Number 3, the luminous Bardo of Dharmata, which not all of us get to experience. And number 4, the karmic Bardo of becoming. Some scholars add a 5th Bardo, which is the Bardo of dreaming. The Bardo of this life sort of recognizes that we're always somewhere on a wheel or cycle, moving toward something else. In the context of the Tibetan view of a lengthy series of successive lives, this particular life is kind of just one brief episode. The painful Bardo of dying. It's kind of like that train wreck that you can't bear to look at, but you can't take your eyes off of it. I recently binge-watched a Netflix series called The OA. Anybody else? I don't know. No spoilers, but I can say that it's a lot about near-death experiences. We do have a fascination with that, even in our culture, and I personally consider it a healthy fascination and not a morbid one. Television series may be another matter. Tibetans are rather detailed about the Bardo of dying. And here's my favorite explanation from a text called Treasures from Juniper Ridge. And pay particular attention to the description of what happens with the basic elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. Mind essence neither takes birth nor dies. It is your own mind. While earth is dissolving, your body cannot support itself and feels heavy. While earth dissolves into water, your exhalations are protracted and inhalations withdrawn. While water dissolves into fire, your mouth and nose dry out. Your exhalations and inhalations are both brief. While fire dissolves into wind, your consciousness grows unclear. While wind dissolves into consciousness, your breathing stops. When your breathing stops, your consciousness immediately arrives in the Bardo of becoming. I don't know, I've talked to some people who have done hospice work, and they seem to find something kind of resonates in these descriptions. The critical difference, as I see it, between the ritual transitions we were talking about earlier, the rites of passage, the New Year's celebrations, and so on, is that the difference between those and the Bardo experience is that the Bardo has an uncertain outcome. Okay, I guess the Bardo of life has a clear outcome in that you will reach the Bardo of dying. But the experiencing of the Bardo of dying lacks clarity for us, and certainly the timing is highly uncertain. But the Bardo of becoming, that's the real uncertainty. Becoming what? Sogyal Rinpoche writes, one of the central characteristics of the Bardos is that they are periods of deep uncertainty. Take this life as a prime example. As the world around us becomes more turbulent, so our lives become more fragmented. Out of touch and disconnected from ourselves, we are anxious, restless, and often paranoid. Even a tiny crisis pricks the balloon of the strategies we hide behind. A single moment of panic shows us how precarious and unstable everything is. To live in the modern world is to live in what is clearly a Bardo realm. You don't have to die to experience one. But he also says this: what distinguishes and defines each of the Bardos is that they are all gaps or periods in which the possibility of awakening is particularly present. It is the uncertainty itself that creates profound chances and opportunities for transformation, if, that is, they can be seen and seized. We are well aware of how our ritualization of transitions can be seized upon, in some sense, to make individual changes, New Year's resolutions, the wishes we make when we blow out the candles on a birthday cake. Bardo states, whenever and however they occur, can also offer such opportunities, if, that is, they can be seen and seized. A recent article by Pema Khandra Rinpoche in Lion's Roar magazine, formerly Shambhala Sun, some of you may be familiar with that, emphasized how important it is to understand that we actually get lots of these Bardo moments throughout our lives, lots of opportunities to practice or rehearse, you might say. And we cope with such moments far better if we can get past our clinging to a belief in absolute reality, especially the belief that our own storyline is the absolutely real thing. I capitalized that, absolutely real thing. and that change is out of the question. Why do we lock ourselves in like this? In my university career, I had many opportunities to counsel with students who were just entering the Bardo of college education. Rite of passage, if you prefer, although there was that uncertain outcome thing. I was always amused at how confident some of them were about their personal story about themselves. At the tender age of 18, they knew beyond doubt that they, quote, hated history or would never understand math. Let it go, kids. Just because you haven't met the historic episode or the mathematical insight that's going to grab you, don't discount the possibilities. Don't close off from it. My personal favorite, of course, was the student who would say, I hate English. Really? What language do you prefer? I don't know. Some Bardos, of course, are bigger than others, and some are huge, really huge. How do you deal with a Bardo? Tibetan texts clearly recognize that we have anxieties about such states, and the adepts and scholars have tried to give counsel and guidance. Have you been devouring all the blogs and op-eds and essays, analyzing and explaining where we are today as a nation and how we came to be here? I certainly have. Has it helped? Maybe. But the effort to solidify, concretize, rationalize isn't always the most useful way of dealing with the profound uncertainty. No one can tell us what comes next. And isn't that what we really want to know? To have some sense of certainty, some sense of control, to put some ground back under our faltering sense of self and purpose. The Tibetan texts identify 6 uncertainties of the Bardo of becoming. And here I am going to take extreme liberties because I find the notions applicable in ways the authors clearly never imagined. So I offer this with apologies. First, there is uncertainty of location and uncertainty of resting place. And keep in mind, this is intended to describe how you feel when you enter this Bardo of becoming after death. But then let's talk about where we are. Uncertainty of location and uncertainty of resting place can, I think, refer to our sense of not knowing where we stand, not knowing what the political lay of the land is at the moment. The texts, the Tibetan texts, say that because the channel structure is lacking, the physical body, because the channel structure is lacking, the mobile wind energy moves uncontrolled, and the consciousness is powerless to control its movements as though riding on a wild horse. I think that describes my current state of mind pretty well. Uncertainty of behavior. How should we act? What should we do? The text indicates that during the first week of the Bardo of becoming, the habitual patterns of the previous life are very pronounced. That seems to fit. We may try to get on with business as usual, but our usual way of acting doesn't seem to be satisfactory, and we worry over what we can do differently. Uncertainty of sustenance. Can we survive this? How will we get through it? Who's got my back? And in a more literal sense, what if the economy craters? What if I lose my job or my retirement fund? Uncertain companionship. Who can we trust? People we thought we knew have unexpected views and opinions. The text, the actual Tibetan text says, and this I just find amusingly apropos to our current situation. So I'll just read it to you. Individuals in the Bardo of becoming have the impression that close relatives and friends are beckoning to them with sweet and loving words, But when they approach, they change into devouring spirits and deadly apparitions. Beside themselves with terror, one searches for somewhere to hide, but there is no escape, nowhere they can go. They have no friends, and for their mental body, there is no resting place. Uncertain mental condition, and here again, I think the text says it all. Sometimes happy, sometimes overwhelmed by suffering. The mental body is constantly fluctuating. So that summarizes a lot of what is experienced in a Bardo state, and I think helps us to identify with the possibility that, yeah, it's kind of where we are. But what can we do about it? There are some wonderful instructions on becoming comfortable with uncertainty from the Tibetan teacher Pema Chodron. And I would highly recommend just about any of her books as instructions for these uncertain times. Pema Chodron, just in case you aren't familiar with her. And I would do her fine work a disservice by trying to summarize it here. So let me just share with you a favorite quote of mine that she has used, and it comes from a German writer by the name of Rudolf Bardo. It goes like this: when an old culture is dying, the new culture is created by a few people who are not afraid to be insecure. Let me say that one more time. When an old culture is dying, the new culture is created by a few people who are not afraid to be insecure. In the depths of the Bardo, one thing that is traditionally done is to invoke the 5 wisdoms. The book Treasures from Juniper Ridge notes that in the Bardo, the 5 disturbing emotions are abandoned and dawn as the 5 wisdoms. So what are the 5 disturbing emotions? These are laid out very clearly in chapter 2 of the Tibetan Book of the Dead in a prayer called The Path of Good Wishes for Saving from the Dangerous Narrow Passageway of the Bardo. Hey, this sounds good. It's going to save us, right? So let me read a bit of it to you. When through illusion, I and others are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of undistracted listening, reflection, and meditation, may the gurus of the inspired line lead us, may the bands of mothers be our rear guard, may we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo, may we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through violent anger we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of the mirror-like wisdom, may the Bhagavan Vajrasattva lead us. May the Mother Mamaki be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through intense pride we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of the wisdom of equality, may the Bhagavan Ratnasambhava lead us. May the Mother, she of the Buddha eye, be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through great attachment we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of discriminating wisdom, may the Bhagavan Amitabha lead us. May the Mother, she of white raiment, be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through intense jealousy we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of the all-performing wisdom, may the Bhagavan Amoghasiddhi lead us. May the Mother, the faithful Tara, be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through intense stupidity we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of the wisdom of reality, may the Bhagavan Vairoshana lead us. May the Mother of great space be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. When through intense illusion we are wandering in samsara, along the bright light path of the abandonment of hallucinatory fear, awe, and terror, May the bands of the Bhagavans of the wrathful ones lead us. May the bands of the wrathful goddesses, rich in space, be our rear guard. May we be saved from the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo. May we be placed in the state of perfect Buddhahood. May it come that all the realms of the Buddhas will be seen. May it come that all the sounds of the Bardo will be known as one's own sounds. May it come that all the radiances will be known as one's own radiances. May it come that the Trikaya will be realized in the Bardo. So the 5 emotions are violent anger, intense pride, great attachment, intense jealousy, and stupidity. Stupidity is an emotion. We are also warned against illusion and urged to abandon hallucinatory fear, awe, and terror. Violent anger is to be defeated through mirror-like wisdom, through clearly seeing things as they are, just like a mirror, only seeing, not reacting. Intense pride is to be defeated through the wisdom of equality or equanimity, being at one with others, being willing to hear arguments and stories that may not align with our own prideful version of things. Great attachment, which is often also translated as passion, is transformed into discriminating awareness, wisdom, and intense curiosity. Jealousy is transformed through all-performing wisdom, also known as wise, swift action. I often tell myself when I'm thinking about these, it's like, don't just sit there being envious. Get up and do something. So action, wise action. Stupidity is defeated by the wisdom of reality, by learning motivated by that intense curiosity that is not wedded to a single point of view, and that is facilitated by equanimity. Hallucinatory fear, awe, and terror are products of illusion, which is combated through undistracted listening, reflection, and meditation. The way through the fearful narrow passageway of the Bardo, it becomes clear from reading the texts, is not easy. But if we face it calmly, without illusion, anger, pride, attachment, jealousy, stupidity, or fear, we may find an exceptional opportunity for transformation of both self and community. Remember that one of the antidotes described is this all-performing wisdom, the wise, swift action. So this is not any kind of suggestion that we take to our cushions and smile benignly to ourselves at some dawning sense of detachment or inner peace. The fearful narrow passageway of this particular Bardo in which we find ourselves requires clear seeing, discernment, equanimity, and action. And may the fiercest Buddhas have your back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Birdwell. We have about 15 minutes for questions. If you raise your hand high, I'll bring the microphone to you. Remember to keep your question brief and to the point so everybody can have a chance.
And any kind of questions are fine, because this kind of covered a lot of different areas.
We have a question from Richard Halpin.
Thank you so much for the adventure you took us on today. I couldn't help but feel that some of the kernels of wisdom that you shared with us today were similar to the sayings in the I Ching. And I wonder if there's any kind of, other than the obvious wisdom connection, if there's any kind of cultural or any kind of otherwise connection that comes to your mind.
Is there anything in particular that you have in mind with that question?
All I said is all I meant.
Okay, gotcha. Yes, certainly there are common historic roots to the emergence of these wisdom traditions. And I am not a great student of the I Ching. I've encountered it from time to time, but I wouldn't presume to speak with any great knowledge on exactly what it says or how it might link up with some of these ideas that we've talked about here this morning.
I'm Kim, and my question is, do the Tibetans see the connection between the Bardo state and things happening in their life when they're going in transitions from one state to another?
Yeah, they do. Or it is my understanding that they always have. I mean, and that's why that first Bardo is the Bardo of the natural Bardo of this life. You know, they see this life as a Bardo, and so a lot of the properties of uncertainty and anxiety and dissatisfaction are just general properties of this life. As for, you know, our idea that there are particular moments in this life that are more Bardo-ish than others, I don't know. It would be interesting to ask a Tibetan monk that question. I am not such a person.
If you would introduce yourself.
My name is Felicia. I'd like to know, just personally curious, how you came to develop your interest in Buddhism, at what age that happened, and how did it grow, and how did it connect to your anthropological studies?
Well, I mean, I grew up as a Methodist minister's daughter, so I went to church an awful lot when I was growing up. I met with Buddhism for the first time in a class on Eastern philosophy in college at SMU back in the 1960s. I also met up with Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh at that time. I mean, only in passing. He was, it was during the Vietnam War, and he was promoting, you know, his peace mission. And we did a one-day fast. God, such privileged little snowflakes we were. One day of fasting, and we decided to call it a rice fast because all we would eat was rice. We couldn't even just really go with it and not eat anything. But anyway, and then, you know, I didn't commit myself to any kind of Buddhist practice, though, until much, much later. Probably sometime in the early 1990s. And my sensation was, I mean, my pursuit of anthropology was fueled by a very deep and abiding curiosity about who we are, how we got here, and what are we going to do about it, you know? I mean, and I felt like I had pursued the Western religions' points of view and the scholarly academic points of view, and encountering Buddhism, especially the actual Buddhist texts and teachings, was, I've often likened it to walking around in this very familiar library, and all of a sudden you open a door that leads into a whole new library. Whereas in Western learning, we were so committed to learning through objectivity, through removal of things from ourselves and studying them rigorously, scientifically. The same goals were pursued in the East by sitting quietly and meditating on it. So it was like a whole new way of discovering what experience is and what it means to be human. And I pursued this, you know, as vigorously as I could, being a fully employed academic and mother of 2 children. But yeah, it was, you know, and I've tried to learn as much as I can. And I feel like it's a wonderful complement to what we do, you know, what we've tried to learn in our culture, in our society, in the West, as it were, Western Civ. Does that, okay, thanks.
If you would introduce yourself, please.
Ed Underhill. Social death, does that ring a bell? Like the hell realms or our hell, excommunication, that kind of stuff. But the big word for me is social death, not those other ones.
Yeah.
Does that,
Yeah.
resonate?
I get you. That would be a really interesting study in itself to try to link up, what we've said about the Bardo and what the immense amount of other things that have been said about the Bardo with the idea of social death. In a sense, the rites of passage that we talked about entail a certain amount of social homicide because you are ending your previous status as a child, let's say, and emerging through this transitional period as an adult. And this is very serious in a lot of cultures. It's like, on the other side of this, you no longer, you are no longer a child. You will no longer be treated as a child. And you can't get away with any kind of childish nonsense. It's like, no, it's behind you. It's all over with. But yeah, as to hell realms, nobody beats the Buddhists in terms of, the Tibetan Buddhists in particular, in terms of description of the hell realms. If you really want some scary stuff for Halloween or something, yeah. There's the cold hell realms and the slashing hell realms. There's all kinds of things. They're really quite specific and graphic. But again, it's like so much else that's in Tibetan Buddhism. It's like you can, just as many Christians do in this society, you can take it on a literal level, or you can take it as the scholars and the adepts do, as ways of thinking about things. So,
If you'd introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Jim Bryce. Perhaps more of a historical development question as to the relation between Hinduism and Buddhism, because Hinduism has this incredible panoply of deities, the constant circle of life and reemergence and that sort of thing, and then Buddhism developing out of that. Perhaps how those fit together and how that might relate to what you spoke about.
Okay. So, basic Buddhism, like Shakyamuni Buddha's life experience, and Hinduism kind of grew out of, Hindu practice, as we know it today anyway, grew kind of out of common roots in India. It was a time, the time of the Buddha in India was a time very much like the time of Jesus in the Middle East, in that there were a lot of, wandering ascetics and people running around preaching and teaching, and it was interesting times. But then Buddhism developed it has spread out and developed in many different ways. The basic division became the division between the Theravada and the Mahayana traditions. The Theravada traditions are found primarily in Sri Lanka and Thailand, and they restrict themselves to a certain number of Pali texts, whereas the Mahayana have a much vaster store of texts that they utilize, and Sanskrit became their language of scholarship. As far as the interface, the sharing between Hinduism and Buddhism, there's a lot of that. A lot of the Hindu deities have counterparts in Indian and Tibetan Buddhist practice. You can't tell the difference. When I was in Nepal, the Nepali people don't really make that much of a distinction between whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu. I mean, on some aspects they do, but they celebrate a lot of the same holy days, and they go make offerings at the same shrines, and yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of differences, I think, in terms of how things are understood, but certainly the superficial parts of it are, it's hard to tell sometimes what somebody's doing. Does that sort of address there's so much more that could be said, but yeah,
We have a question from Becky Halpin.
So I thought one of the most interesting things you said was that Buddhists feel it's important to have little Bardo experiences all sprinkled through your life so that you can accommodate them when they happen. And in particular, I think it would be helpful to have those experiences so that when you come to the big Bardo, you're ready. So I don't know if you can answer this, but how do you think your experiences with Buddhism will help you or be there for you when you experience, I guess, particularly the Bardo of leaving this life and going on to whatever's next?
It's called the Bardo of dying. You can say that. There's, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a whole set of practices known as poa, which are intended to prepare the individual and to teach you specifically what you should be thinking about and what you should do at the time of death. I haven't taken advantage of that. Maybe I'm scared, I don't know. But hopefully I will be able to. Okay, let me preface this with something. I've always had I hope you won't call it morbid curiosity, but a curiosity about death. It's like, that's a pretty important experience. We should pay attention when it's happening because, it's entirely possible that's the only chance we're going to get to experience that. So I guess I've always sort of had that kind of an attitude toward it. But I do believe that the Tibetan instructions the Buddhist instructions about approaching things with clear seeing, equanimity, discernment, paying attention, trying to stay as aware, awake, and attentive and curious and positive as you possibly can, which, yeah. And it's not a question of that we need to have these Bardo experiences. It's that we have them and we need to recognize them and let them be something that we work with.
Right. So. Thank you, Ms. Birdwell, for a very thought-provoking presentation. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you.